about the very important information that we're going to be presenting tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Manager Green. I'm the Environmental Director for Hudson Rivers with Clearwater, and I also serve on the Ulster County Legislature. And we're here tonight because we have a very serious issue that threatens this region, from New Jersey through Rockland County, Orange County, Ulster County, Greene County, up to Albany, and that is the proposed Pilgrim pipeline. I hope that you all got a copy of the issues paper, and you'll get much more information from our panel of experts tonight. At this point, I'd like to, I don't see her, but I know she's here, I'd like to acknowledge Town of New Paltz Supervisor Susan Zimmet. And any other elected officials in the room? Okay. John Hughes is Councilman-elect, and Jen Metzger and Jen Metzger serves on the Town Council in Rosendale. And all of you live in towns, cities, and villages and counties, and we're going to be asking your help. But first we want to provide the background information so that you can speak in a very articulate way about the problem we are facing. And working for Clearwater, I can tell you this is one of many problems. We are at a crossroads where we're either going to fully embrace the need to transition to a green energy economy based on renewable energy and energy efficiency, or we're going to continue to invest in infrastructure for fossil fuel and nuclear energy, which is dangerous and compounding the climate crisis that is probably the most serious global issue we are faced with in this decade and in this century. So you are all part. We're sitting at a tipping point. It could go either way, and thank you for coming out tonight. I'm going to just briefly introduce our panelists, starting with, to my right, your left, Jen Metzger, Councilwoman for the Town of Rosendale and member of the Citizens for Local Power. To Jen's right is Philip Musique from Riverkeeper. And to Philip's right is Nadia Steinsor of the Oil and Gas Accountability Project and Earthworks Action. And to Nadia's right is Kim Frazek of the Sane Energy Project and Food Not Fracking. So with that, we're going to go through the panel, and then maybe for each panelist, if there's one or two clarifying questions, no speeches, nothing, but something that they said that you need clarification, and then we will have a nice long opportunity for questions and answers and discussion. So we'll start with Jen Metzger. Welcome, Jen.
Thanks. It's great to see such a great crowd here tonight. I want to start out by just reporting for those who don't know that the town of Rosendale became the first town in New York to adopt a resolution of opposition to the Pilgrim pipeline. In New Jersey have already adopted resolutions. And I believe Wednesday's next town board meeting in New Paltz, just 2 days from now, we will also see another resolution of opposition passed, and we want to keep this momentum going. Every town and county along the pathway of this proposed pipeline. It's very important to have this unity. I'm going to speak tonight about what brought me to this conclusion that the pipeline is a bad thing. I'm going to just let all my true colors show right up front, and give a broad overview of the issue. I first became aware of the proposed Pilgrim pipeline in July when a very upset resident contacted me because they received a letter from a company called Pilgrim that was seeking access to their property to survey it for the center line of the pipeline. This letter was written in such a way to suggest that the resident really didn't have much of a choice. The letter said that they were being contacted as a courtesy, and I since learned later that residents who had said, no, you can't come on my property, received phone calls, or in some cases, I guess, visits from the company representatives, basically threatening legal action. So I called the company, identified myself as a municipal official, and asked a very direct question. I said, do you have a legal right to enter people's private property without permission? And what is the basis of that right? And the answer I got was the same answer, I guess, that everyone got, which is, we're a transportation corporation and we have rights. So basically they didn't answer the question. But I can tell you, it's a fact that they don't have that right, at least at the present time. So when I learned, what I learned from my first introduction to this company was that it was willing to be deceitful and kind of bullying. And I decided at that point to research and find out as much as I could about the company and also about the alleged benefits of a pipeline, because I wanted our town to be able to voice its opinion in an informed way. So what I'm going to do, I did write this backgrounder on it, and copies are available, and it's also available online, but I'm just going to touch on some of the main points of background. So who is Pilgrim Pipeline? This is a company that was created for the purpose of building this pipeline. It is a Connecticut-based affiliate of Petroleum Solutions Management, LLC, based in Winter Haven, Florida. Its leaders, its president and vice president, are former Coke industry executives. The Coke conglomerate has a pipeline company that owns about 4,000 miles of crude oil pipeline. It is worth noting that Coke Industries was made to pay the largest civil fine ever imposed under federal environmental law. At the time, this was in the year 2000, for more than 300 oil spills from its pipelines and oil facilities in 6 states. So it's good to keep that in mind. What is Pilgrim proposing? The company wants to build a 178-mile long, we say pipeline, but it's actually 2 pipelines, 2 underground pipelines. One would transport back in crude oil, and the other would transport refined products made from back in crude oil, between Albany, New York, and Linden, New Jersey. These pipelines would more or less follow, the intention is for them to more or less follow the New York State Thruway, I-87, from Albany before turning east at 287 to reach the Phillips Bayway, 66 Bayway Refinery in Linden. In Ulster County, the pipeline path would run through the towns of Esopus, Lloyd, New Paltz, Plattekill, Rosendale, Saugerties, and Ulster in the city of Kingston. Other affected counties in New York include Albany, Greene, Orange, and Rockland counties. The company is hoping to get permission from the Thruway Authority to use its right-of-way. But it's clear from the maps, the company maps, and I believe we have a couple of copies here for you all to look at later on. The proposed pathway does veer off that right-of-way, and in Rosendale it veers off pretty considerably. Okay, what is Bakken crude oil? This is crude oil produced from the Bakken Shale region in North Dakota. It's somewhat unique, I guess, in that it's extracted through the process of hydraulic fracturing or fracking. It's long been known that there were these oil deposits there, but it was not economical to extract that oil until fracking technology was developed. So it's rather a recent development that it's been these deposits have been exploited. Really it started around 2007, 2008. Production really took off, and this is why we've seen this enormous growth in New York in the transport of crude oil by train and rail. Just to give you a sense of this enormous growth, in 2008, 9,500 carloads of crude oil were transported by rail. This number increased to 234,000 carloads in 2012 and to 434,000 carloads in 2013, which is the equivalent of about 300 million barrels of oil. Each barrel holds 42 gallons of crude oil, so it's a lot of oil. And this is feeding not just New York markets for refined crude products from gasoline and heating oil, but also a booming demand for these products in foreign markets sailing out of New York Harbor. Now, Backman crude has some unusual characteristics. It is more volatile than other types of crude oil, and this is a consequence of the geology of the Backman shale deposits and also of the process of extracting it, which traps much more natural gas and other gases in the oil than other crude oils. As a consequence, we've seen some pretty deadly and terrifying rail accidents. I think Philip will probably talk about those later on. But it was enough to spur the Federal Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration to issue a warning specifically about the dangers of the volatility of Backman crude oil. Now, the company makes various claims about the benefits of this pipeline. Based on my research, the benefits are questionable at best and fictional at worst. And I'd just like to review a few of those before turning it over to Philip. First, the pipeline would be a safer mode. This is the first claim. The pipeline would be a safer mode of transporting crude oil than rail or barge. The reality is, whether you transport it by rail, barge, or pipeline, they all carry risk. According to federal data, pipelines spill more oil per ton mile than do rail shipments, that have a lower incidence of fatalities and injuries. Now, I believe the true risk, the safety risk of moving Backman crude by pipeline may be underestimated because the federal agency that collects this data doesn't disaggregate it by where it comes from. Most crude oil is heavier and less volatile than Backman crude, whereas in the case of rail transport, most Backman crude oil is transported by rail. So it's not surprising that there's a higher incidence of accidents by rail on trains. Okay, it's also important to remember that this is a bi-directional pipeline, and it's going to be carrying products that are highly flammable as well, such as gasoline. Now, another important point is that rail and barge transport is not going to stop when a pipeline is constructed. The reality is that all three modes of transport will continue to be used, and there are three reasons for this. First of all, the proposed pipeline will carry 140 million barrels of crude oil per year, and as I mentioned, in 2013 alone, 300 million barrels of crude oil were carried by train. Secondly, exports from the East Coast for refined products made from Backman crude are booming, so whatever the company may say, the pipeline is really adding capacity to meet foreign demand and domestic demand. It's not replacing capacity. And three, rail provides advantages to industry players over pipelines to respond quickly to changing market conditions. And the industry is not likely going to want to give up that flexibility. So the bottom line is all three modes of transportation would be used transporting Backman crude. The pipeline is adding capacity. It is not replacing it. Claim number 2, the pipeline will provide a more environmentally sound way of transporting petroleum products. This is not true. As I mentioned, more oil has spilled per ton mile from pipelines than from rail. This is all federal data. This all comes from federal data. Pipeline operators reported 1,880 crude oil spills nationwide between 2003 and 2013, or averaging about 1 incident every other day. Over that 10-year period, 44 million gallons of oil were spilled, fouling groundwater, surface water bodies, farmland, and woodlands, and causing over $2.5 billion worth of property damage. Now, one of the problems with pipelines is poor leak detection. We know pretty quickly when a train derails, but we don't necessarily know when a pipeline is leaking. And only 5% of all incidents reported were discovered through leak detection equipment. Often it's the public that finds out about the leak and reports it. Claim number 3, this is my last one. The pipeline will protect against fuel shortages and improve resilience. It is true that transport by pipeline is less likely to be disrupted by severe weather events. But I would argue that there are far better ways of improving community resilience than building a pipeline. First, I just want to point out that the gas shortages that were pervasive after Hurricane Sandy were the result of power outages. The gas stations just couldn't pump the gas. But the governor has initiated a plan following these major storm events, Irene, Lee, and Sandy, to address immediate term supply issues during catastrophic weather events. And this has included backup energy supplies, and it's also included creating statewide strategic fuel reserves, which is a very sensible approach to addressing the immediate issues of supply during severe storms. It is a much more sensible solution than investing in a fossil fuel future, investing in infrastructure that commits us to consuming those fossil fuels for 30 years or more. Beyond the immediate term, the path to real resilience is not more fossil fuel, but less of it. A locally based clean energy economy holds the most promise for improving resilience and fighting climate change, as well as increasing energy dependence, reducing energy costs, keeping more energy dollars at home rather than exporting them. We export most of our energy dollars. I'm going to end by suggesting, on a positive note, an alternative. Citizens for Local Power has been working to bring a program called Community Choice Aggregation to New York, which would empower our communities to get greater control over sourcing our own energy supply and investing our energy dollars locally in renewable generation, in energy efficiency, in demand management programs to improve our resilience, to fight climate change, to increase our energy independence and get a hold on volatile and escalating energy costs. We have materials about community choice aggregation at the table outside. The point here is that we do have solutions to addressing the energy needs within reach, and we just have to reach for that. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hi. I'm just going to set up a quick PowerPoint. Just bear with me for a few seconds. And I promise you it has lots of horrible pictures and not a ton of text, so I'll try not to bore you to death. I'll do my best. So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight. introduce myself first. I'm Philip Usigas. I'm the Hudson River Program Director at Riverkeeper. How many folks, just a quick show of hands, how many folks are familiar with our organization, with Hudson River? Awesome. Okay, good. So I won't take any time to talk about our work. We're working on crude oil for obvious reasons. Our mission is to protect and restore the Hudson. The crude oil shipping down the river and down the rail line that runs along the river, and an oil pipeline that we're talking about tonight that would run along the river would certainly pose a huge risk to the environment, to public safety. So it's clearly within our mission, and it's a major priority for us to be working on this right now. So I'm going to take this. Can everyone hear me? It's a little hard for me to lean down. Can you go and hold the mic up like this? Okay, sorry. All right, I will do the game show thing. And I'm just not sure how to change the slide.
The right arrow on the key. Oh,
There's no-
arrows.
No, it's right here. Sorry. Excellent. Okay.
We're getting it
All
down.
right, I got it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is get us to step back a little bit. Jen did a great job of introducing the Pilgrim pipeline and some specifics about it. What I'm going to do is take a few minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and step back and talk about the larger shipping of crude oil as a whole by various means through the Hudson Valley. Basically, why is all this crude oil all of a sudden coming into the Hudson Valley? Why is it being shipped? And why are all these new projects coming online? So I'm going to try and give you a broader perspective of how it's being shipped, what the risks are, and how you can get involved. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the pipeline. I've got some ideas during the discussion that I want to make sure to talk to people about. So, and I'm going to go through this very quickly. It's a long PowerPoint, but again, not a lot here. Tonight we're going to talk about the oil that you see on your left, the Bakken crude. Bakken is a light sweet crude, so it's very thin. In terms of environmental concerns, it's the kind of oil that will float on the surface of the water, so it doesn't have the same concerns as the tar sands crude, which you see on the right, which is the oil that is coming out of Alberta, Canada. And if you've read about the Keystone XL pipeline, you know that tar sands are heavy crude oil, or it's also called sinking oil. It has a whole host of dangers and risks associated with it that are very different than Bakken crude. So
You can hold the mic a little farther away.
farther away now?
Yeah.
How's this?
Good.
Okay, sorry. So the main concern with Bakken crude is that, as Jen said, it's explosive. So it has a very high volatility and a very low flash point, which basically equates to it being about as explosive and flammable as gasoline. So it's very explosive, very flammable, very unstable and dangerous. So just to give you a sense, we talked about this a little bit. The map shows where the Bakken oil is coming from: North Dakota, the Bakken Formation, and a little bit of in Canada as well. That's coming cross-country almost entirely by rail. As Jen said, there's not a whole pipeline infrastructure built to bring the oil east to the East Coast. And so it's going by rail to the East Coast, also going by rail to the West Coast and refineries in the Pacific Northwest. So our concern is that hold it farther, okay. Our concern is that the oil is all being shipped by rail cross country and then is being coming into Albany, where it's being loaded onto barges and tankers to be taken downriver to refineries, or it's being it kind of goes just south of Albany and comes down the CSX rail line along the west side of the Hudson River and is shipped by rail, stays on rail cars and is shipped by rail down to refineries in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And I want to stop for a minute. I think I want to step back for a second and just give you 3 things to keep in mind for the entire evening. And I think Jen has kind of teed these up already when you hear us talking. The 3 takeaways I think from tonight are, one is there's obviously a massive oil boom going on in the country. They're producing huge amounts of crude oil, and they need to use every means they can to get it to market. And so the second thing to keep in mind is no matter what you hear from the pipeline company or from barge companies or companies that want to build more rail lines or build new oil terminals on the Hudson, this is not a matter of either or. It's not a matter of if they build a pipeline, they're not going to need barges on the Hudson, or they're not going to need rail cars. they're going to be using every means possible to transport this oil to market down the Hudson Valley. So don't fall for that messaging when you hear it. And the third thing to keep in mind at this point is that Bakken crude oil is very, very dangerous and unstable, and the way they're transporting it is very dangerous and has led to deadly accidents. So just out of everything you hear tonight, I think those three things are really important. Again, I'm going to go through this very quickly. As we talked about a little bit, this huge oil boom in Bakken oil production over the last about 7 to 8 years, has led to about a 400% increase in oil production. 2008, 9,000 tanker carloads. 2013, we had 400,000. And if you're shipping more oil, you're going to have more oil spilled. And so I think this is a useful statistic to keep in mind. From 1975 to 2012, there was less than 1 million gallons of oil spilled from rail cars carrying oil. And in 2013 alone, there was over 1 million gallons spilled. So this is not, a lot of the statistics I have are not so much focused on pipelines. I think Jen has good statistics on that. We're going to talk about that later. But just in terms of oil transport generally, the more that gets shipped, the more that gets spilled, and the more environmental damage you have. Crude oil transport in the Hudson, as we said, it's coming down the Hudson Valley by rail, by barge that you see on the right, and by tanker. There's actually a 7 million gallon actual oil tanker that comes down the Hudson once a week. It goes up to Albany and loads up with oil, and then it goes out to Nova Scotia to a refinery, goes down the Hudson and out up to the northern Maritimes in Canada to a refinery in Nova Scotia. So again, every means available, and I think if Pilgrim pipeline goes forward, which I don't think it will, if we have anything to say about it, if it does go forward, that's just another means that's going to be used that has its own risks. So the risks with the rail cars are the rail cars that they're using to ship the Bakken crude oil were never designed to carry explosive materials. So they are basically the same black tanker cars that you see going down the rails are used to ship orange juice and corn syrup and other kinds of chemicals. They use these same cars to ship Bakken crude, so they're completely undesigned, not designed to carry dangerous materials, and we have the accidents that you're going to see in a minute. The other problem we have here in the Hudson Valley is the Coast Guard, which is in charge of responding to an oil spill on the Hudson or into the Hudson, and that's either from a train or a ship or anything, is not prepared to deal with this. They have an outdated spill response plan. They're starting to update it now, but there's a real concern if the oil does get spilled, then we won't be able to clean it up. And we'll have lasting environmental damage in the Hudson, which is what Riverkeeper in particular is very, very concerned about. I'm just going to go through a few slides just to show you some of the accidents that have happened. Lac Mégantic in Quebec is the most infamous. A train rolled into the downtown area of the town on a Saturday night and derailed and exploded. I think 20 or 30 of the train cars exploded and killed 47 people. It basically incinerated a 2-block area in the downtown of this tourist town in Quebec. Aliceville, Alabama was a train carrying Bakken oil, spilled into wetlands and is still not fully cleaned up, spilled tens of thousands of gallons of oil. You can see some of it there. Castleton, North Dakota, Bakken train. You can see the scale of the train cars are down in the foreground of the picture. This luckily happened in a very rural area. They still had to evacuate. The local town that was about 5 miles away was evacuated because when Bakken oil burns, the fumes of the smoke are toxic. So they evacuated people in a town nearby to keep them safe. Philadelphia in January, we had a near miss over the Schuylkill River where this is another mixed train, but this is a train carrying Bakken crude. Literally came off the tracks and was hanging over the river until they cleaned it up. Lynchburg, Virginia. This is actually a situation that we looked at very closely because this is what we would be facing on the Hudson River if we had a train spill where we had Bakken crude oil going into the river. The picture you're seeing is literally the river on fire. And so the rail line in Lynchburg goes right along the riverbank. In this situation, the train derailed and the cars fell off the tracks towards the river side, not towards the village side, and rolled off the tracks, broke open, ignited, and the oil flowed into the river and caught fire. And so that resulted in a drinking water intake for a large city downriver being shut down, and as you can imagine, major environmental damage. If the cars had gone off the rails to the right into the town instead of to the left into the river, we would have seen something like Lagnaganze. We have a sister organization called the James Riverkeeper, and the Riverkeeper himself has his offices about a block from where this happened, and in a brick warehouse downtown. And, he said they could hear the explosion, they could feel the heat when they evacuated the building. So this is, it's hard. You can't be alarmist about this. This is actually happening. This is a major, major risk to our communities. On the Hudson River, this picture is a little hard to see, but this is an oil tanker that's on its maiden voyage down the Hudson, actually ran aground in Catskill that was loaded with crude oil. The outer hull of the ship actually was torn open. That's what you see in the kind of black area there. And luckily the inner hull was not breached, but we could have had a major, literally multi-million-gallon oil spill in one of the most sensitive areas of the Hudson. And that was the first voyage the ship ever made down the river. So lots of risks here. Again, I'll go very quickly. Mississippi River, there was a barge collision that released 31,000 gallons. We saw 65 miles of the river closed. Galveston Bay, this is again, large oil spill. This was a heavy oil spill, not a Bakken crude spill, but another large spill killed lots of wildlife. Kalamazoo River is, I think, very important to think about when we're talking about the Pilgrim pipeline. This was actually a heavy crude oil spill, not Bakken, but more like a tar sands oil that was spilled into the Kalamazoo River in Michigan. As you can see, 800,000 gallons from a pipeline. And that spill is still being cleaned up today. It's literally cost, I think at this point, $2.5 billion. 35 miles of the river, I think, is still closed to the public. And essentially, EPA's only recourse at this point is to have the company literally just remove the bottom of the river, because the oil in this case is very heavy, sinking oil. It sank to the bottom during the spill, was carried downstream, killed everything in the river bottom. So they're basically just going in and dredging out the entire riverbed. That's the only way they can find to clean it up. So when we're talking about Pilgrim Pipeline tonight, we are thinking about, when a pipeline like that crosses tributaries like Esopus Creek, like other tributaries, Rondout Creek, going through the Hudson Valley, if you have a leak or a spill from one of these pipelines, it can devastate a waterway. And if it's close enough to the Hudson and the spill is big enough, that can flow into the Hudson River and cause major damage. In New York, we've had a number of near misses. We had the oil tanker run aground. We've had multiple derailments. None of them have led to fires or explosions, thankfully, but lots of close calls. We had a 100-car train, the Bakken oil train, that actually ran into a semi-trailer that was stalled on the tracks in Nyack, actually downtown Nyack. And because the train was going north at the time, all the cars were empty. The same train could have been going south, could have been full, and we would have had a disaster. So, the state has done a number of inspections of oil trains since the public has become very concerned about this, and found a number of violations of inspection requirements, of safety violations from the trains, everything from track damage to braking systems, you name it. Again, the government response, I won't go into much detail on this. What the federal government has done with the rail cars is they've now come in and said they're going to phase out these very old rail cars, and they're going to come up with a new design that is theoretically accident-proof and explosion-proof to carry the Bakken oil. The cars they're using now are called DOT-111s. They're, again, very, very dangerous and just not designed to carry dangerous materials. The other things that are going on, the Coast Guard is doing is updating its spill response plan, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm happy to answer more questions on these later if you like. New York State has been fairly limited in what they've done, I think mainly because they don't want to be seen as too aggressive against the oil industry, and I think because the state is claiming that it has very little legal authority over rail shipping of oil, especially because it's interstate shipping of oil, and the railroad industry is regulated by the federal government. primarily. Now, that doesn't mean the state doesn't have some authority, but they're very unwilling to use it. So, something to keep in mind on the Pilgrim pipeline, because of the pipeline case with the crude oil pipeline, you don't have a federal agency that has ultimate authority over the crude oil line. It's very different than natural gas pipelines, where an agency like FERC has very broad authority and is very difficult to oppose. With a gas pipeline, you don't have that with an oil pipeline. Oil pipelines have to get state permits they need, federal permits they need for the environmental damage they do, but they have to get access to property to run, to establish a route to build a pipeline. If they can't get access to easements to property, they can't build a line. So it's something we're going to talk about tonight when we talk about eminent domain and these pipeline company officials coming to people's houses and saying that they have a right to survey. They don't have a right to survey, and they don't have a right to eminent domain. So we have a very different situation when it comes to oil pipelines and potentially stopping them. I think I'm going to skip this. I can go into it during the Q&A, but it's a lot of detail. Essentially, Riverkeeper put in very detailed comments on these proposed new safety standards for the rail cars for Bakken crude. We found a lot of problems with the regulations, as you can imagine. One of the main problems was that the federal government was proposing they would phase out these cars over 3 to 5 years, which we think is way too long. And that they wouldn't take them off the rails altogether. They would use the same tanker cars that we know break open and cause explosions, and they would just start shipping tar sands crude in those cars instead of Bakken crude, which we think is completely unacceptable. So they also wouldn't limit the size of the trains, even though these trains are over 1.5 miles long, and they have no requirement to have spill response plans for these individual trains. So when you see a ship going down the Hudson full of oil, it has a very thorough plan about how it's supposed to respond to an oil spill. When you see a train going down the west side of the Hudson, no plan whatsoever. I'll just skip over this. I want to make sure the other folks have time to talk. Just a few notes I made very quickly on Pilgrim to think about. As I said, there's no single federal agency that has a siting or permitting authority over Pilgrim pipeline. Crude oil pipelines are kind of an exception, so they, unlike gas, they don't. There's not one agency with that authority. There are agencies like the Army Corps of Engineers is going to have permitting authority for certain permits they need for going to wetlands and building the pipeline. The state DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, will have some authority over certain things, which I can talk about in more detail. But that's a benefit to the public, really. In a way, that's an opening, because if you have concerns about the pipeline and you want to make it difficult for them to achieve this, the best way to do that is to not allow them to establish a route or a right-of-way. The other thing I want to mention, and I can talk about more later, there's a lot of discussion about the Thruway Authority and the pipeline company going to the Thruway and trying to get permission to use that right-of-way. I've been told by contacts at DEC in the state that they did approach the Thruway Authority to get that permission. That the company is basically, they may be going forward, still looking into that, but they think that's going to be too expensive, too complicated, and will take too long for them to permit. So, and the Thruway Authority historically is very resistant to allowing a lot of access to that right of way. So I think that's, it's not completely off the table, but I think it's fairly unlikely that they're going to get access to that right of way. Just to listen again, I can talk about these. There's state and federal permits that to keep in mind and to look for when the Pilgrim pipeline actually starts applying for permits. DEC needs to give them permits to build in wetlands, as does the Army Corps. DEC needs to give them what's called a 401 certification, which is essentially an approval that building the pipeline and operating it complies with state water quality standards, basically state environmental regulations. The state will also likely have to give it what's called a coastal consistency approval, which is another kind of environmental review that has to happen. All of these are things that the public can comment on, the public can request hearings on. So there will be a fair bit of opportunity for public comment. Key thing to keep in mind, I think, as people get involved with the pipeline is at every opportunity, we need to push for a full environmental review, because these state and federal agencies are likely going to try and push this project through as quickly as possible, and they'll do that by limiting the environmental review as much as they can. And so pushing for a full review is important because it's a process that matters. If you get a full review, you look at all the impacts, you look at alternatives to the project, and in this case, if you're talking about a crude oil pipeline, the impacts include what happens when the effect of transporting all that crude oil means that's all going to get burned, and that's all going to add to climate change. So those impacts will have to be looked at. And there are also federal permits that they need if they affect endangered species, which can also be a powerful tool. Just some basics. Riverkeeper has a crude oil campaign that we started about a year ago now, I guess, not a few months ago. You can go to our riverkeeper.org/crude page to see what we've been doing. We have some actions up there. Again, I know you all are here to talk about the Pilgrim pipeline, but which Riverkeeper will be working on very, very closely. I know Jen mentioned county, the lead county. I'm sorry. Yeah, in Rosedale. So, I think there's a lot of opportunity at the local and the county level to get resolutions passed opposing the pipeline. And I think that is it. All right. My email is up here, and I'm happy to give it out afterwards if anyone has questions for me. And that's our webpage and our Twitter site. So I hope that gives you an overview, and I'm looking forward to getting into more detail on the pipeline as well. Thank you.
I'm a lot shorter, so I don't think I can hold it, right? Finally, height is not an advantage. So I'm Nadia Steinzer. I work for Earthworks Oil and Gas Accountability Project, which is a national organization, and I'm the Eastern Program Coordinator. I live right outside of Woodstock. So in all of the pipeline and infrastructure projects that my organization has looked at and involved in, this is the one literally closest to home so far. Earthworks has been around in different forms for about 25 years. One of our main parts of our mission, besides exposing issues around oil and gas, thus the oil and gas accountability issue, is to provide direct support to what we call frontline communities, people who are living right directly with the impacts of oil and gas development. And so for many years, much of the debate in the focus in the fracking debate has really focused on production. And now, as Phil pointed out, producers are like, well, now we got to get all this stuff to market. And there are a lot of differences between gas and oil. Phil mentioned some of them from the regulatory side. But when it comes to dealing with the impacts and the concerns and the issues around, do we want more fossil fuel delivery and production expansion in our communities, it's really a lot of the same issues. So now that the debate has shifted to delivery and processing, we're really talking a lot about infrastructure, and pipelines are a key part of that ever-growing spider web of infrastructure projects. And there's so many pipeline projects going on right now, it makes your head spin. And the industry itself, at least very much the gas side, and I think it's the same discussion on the oil side, are saying we have to get this stuff to market. All of the boom was predicated on getting it to market. And so that's why we're seeing this proliferation of pipelines. So one of the issues that we also focus on at Earthworks, and I've been working on a lot in Pennsylvania, where I spent a lot of my time, are the health impacts of natural gas production and processing and delivery. And in looking at the Pilgrim pipeline, it's pretty clear that there are obviously going to be health impacts that have been covered here with spills and explosions and general safety issues. But I just want to touch on some of the lessons learned from the natural gas discussions and this work that's gone on around health, and apply that look at how that could be applied to the Pilgrim Pipeline project and also provide another avenue for folks to get involved from a health perspective. And it's not as if we're not looking at oil health impacts. It's definitely there. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that are similar. So a little bit about the big picture. As I said, oil and gas development has now come much closer to home. We were just discussing before the presentation started that we don't think there's another crude oil pipeline in New York State that's being proposed, and the gas and oil boom in the U.S. from the Bakken oil shale to the Eagle Ford oil shale, and of course the Marcellus in New York and Pennsylvania has really brought all of the issues around fossil fuel development, what it actually costs communities and what it actually costs the environment, much closer to home. So what we do know from a health perspective is that we're dealing with a lot of substances, crude oil, the chemicals used in fracking, the emissions caused by industrial processes, and these are heavy industrial processes, are very well established. Where the gaps lie in research and in documentation is the direct health impacts, going from point A to point B, a compressor station or a pipeline or a well, to the respiratory problems or the nosebleeds that the family's having. Fortunately, we've seen just a surge in research in this regard in the last several years, and I don't have time tonight to go into that. That's a whole other topic. But it's actually quite exciting as well as extremely sobering to see the results of a lot of the health studies that have been going on. And Earthworks has also done a lot of work just surveying homeowners on the front lines in Pennsylvania, and it's very sobering. So another important thing to remember from a health perspective is that all of this permitting is done piecemeal, and cumulative impacts are ignored. As Philip mentioned, that's why it's so important to get these full-blown environmental impact studies for these mega projects, which the Pilgrim Pipeline would be, because then you have to look at all the different aspects. And a major concern for adding these infrastructure projects in areas like where we live and New Jersey as well is that these are already fairly polluted areas. And so you're adding industrial processes in areas that, from a regulatory perspective and of course, from a health perspective, may already be out of compliance with air regulations and air limits. Everybody knows about ozone alerts, right? Code red days. Not so many up here in the Hudson Valley, fortunately, but clearly we already have a pollution problem. So what are the additive effects of more infrastructure? And then I want to talk about loopholes for polluters. I'm assuming many of you have been following the fracking debate around gas. Have you heard about the Halliburton loophole? Have you seen Gasland? Okay, so there are actually 7 major environmental laws that have distinct loopholes for the oil and gas industry. And that doesn't mean that the oil and gas industry is not regulated under these federal statutes. They are, but there are really big holes. I usually say enough to drive a gas rig through. I guess we could say they're big enough to drive a crude oil tanker through. And one that's really relevant in this context and for air quality is the Clean Air Act loophole, which it talks of a major part of the Clean Air Act is that when you're permitting, you aggregate the emissions from many small sources. So if you have a lot of different engines and a lot of different industrial sources in one location, you pull those emissions together and you say, well, let's look at what the impact of this is altogether. It's called aggregation. The oil and gas industry doesn't have to follow aggregation. So it actually specifically says in the Clean Air Act that it doesn't apply to oil and gas wells, nor does it apply to most compressor and pump stations. And I'm talking a bit about pump stations, because the compressor and pump stations are what move the gas and the oil through the pipeline. So they're always going to be regulated as minor sources, not as major sources, which would kick it up to a whole different control level as far as air emissions are concerned. Then another important thing, and this still needs some research to see how it would relate exactly to crude oil pipelines, is that hydrogen sulfide, which is a deadly gas, recognized far-wise as a deadly gas, was removed from the list of regulated hazardous air pollutants when the Clean Air Act loophole was put in for oil and gas. It's very well documented that hydrogen sulfide exists in production fields, in both oil and gas production fields. There's actually been a whole slew of tragic oil and gas field worker deaths because of the inhalation of hydrogen sulfide. So the companies are required to remove most of it before moving the oil or gas through a pipeline, but it's a bone of contention of how much actually gets removed and how much would be released in the case of a leak or rupture along the pipeline. So pollution en route, I mentioned pump stations. The picture here at the top is a crude oil pipeline pump station in Colorado. I was looking for some in the east, but this is the closest I could get. They definitely can leak emissions. There's a lot of discussion right now, also in Washington, D.C., about controlling methane emissions from natural gas pipelines. Well, you have the same issues with oil pipelines, not methane per se, but leaks, and what would those air emissions contain. As I said before, pump stations keep the oil and the other products that would be coming back north, in the case of the Pilgrim pipeline, flowing. They have to be located, just like compressor stations for natural gas pipelines, about every 40 or 50 miles or so along the pipeline route. And I think the Pilgrim pipeline is close to 200 miles. So there would be several of these pump stations. The size and the frequency of the pump stations and where they would be located would depend a lot on the product and the capacity of the line, and also terrain is really important. So if it starts to have to go over hilly areas or dip down, say, under a river, and then come back up, which is in part of the plan, you'd need to keep pumping the oil through just to keep it moving. And there's also then depressurization and increase in pressure. So there's a lot of, and these pump stations, as you can see, have a lot of engines. Some of the mechanisms are underground and some are above ground. So pollution sources would come from all of these engines, leaks, potential ruptures in the line, and releases of pressure, just like you would if you're following the fracking, the natural gas fracking issues around blowdowns around compressor stations when they have to release the pressure so that the station doesn't explode. And again, the volume of emissions and the components, the actual pollutants, would depend a lot on the size, the equipment, the control technologies, and which product is moving through. It's going to be a little bit different if it's the crude oil going down versus the kerosene coming up. But what is increasingly well documented is that volatile organic compounds are linked when they mix with heat and sunlight with ozone, and volatile organic compounds come off of all of these installations. And that leads directly to respiratory and cardiovascular problems. And again, I'm not talking specifically about the Pilgrim pipeline or specifically about, a generic pump station, but it is really, whenever you have pipelines, you have all of this equipment running the pipeline. Oil, of course, the main constituent is benzene, which is a known carcinogen. So if you have leaks from the pipeline, it's going to be benzene releases. And then we do have, and again, I keep using the word tragic and sobering, but it really is the increasing number of reports directly from the oil and gas fields and frontline communities that live around this equipment, that they increasingly have headaches, dizziness, eye, nose, and throat irritation, nosebleeds, and fatigue. And still a lot we need to learn about the Pilgrim pipeline. I searched high and low for some information from Pilgrim about pump stations and other equipment that would be used on the pipeline. And of course, the plans are all preliminary. No mention of pump stations, no mention of engines anywhere. It's just a nice, neat line on a map curving through our town. So this is definitely a big unanswered question here. And for any of you living along the pipeline route, I would think you would really want to know where these stations are going to go. So a couple of cautionary tales about crude oil pipelines and air quality. Anyone remember the Mayflower, Arkansas big Enbridge pipeline carrying tar sands oil erupted, that town is gone forever. I think there are a couple of families still living there. Most people have been evacuated, relocated. Crude oil spilled all over the town, flowed through the streets. Many people soon after, from just inhaling the crude oil, reported these symptoms that I've described. And the same thing happened in May in Los Angeles. The picture here at the bottom is of workers cleaning up the oil, scrubbing it off the streets of Los Angeles. And I'd like you to note that they're not wearing respirators. This is something that occurred to me when I found this picture. And they're scrubbing it off the streets of Los Angeles. Same thing, many people in the area were evacuated, many had to be rushed to the hospital simply from inhalation of the crude oil fumes. And I think we have a lot to learn from all the communities in Pennsylvania and in New York increasingly, and other states that are living near compressor stations with natural gas moving through in terms of engines and noise and diesel and gas emissions just from running the stations. So the question that guides all the health research right now going on around oil and gas is, at what point do you have enough evidence to prompt change? Well, obviously we have enough evidence to prompt concern. That's why we're all here tonight, and that's why you're here. And fortunately, a lot of that's leading to action. So a major thing I would suggest in going forward and working on this issue and the pipeline, the Pilgrim pipeline in your communities, is to first and foremost demand transparency. Companies, I think Jen, you mentioned, I think you call them liars? Yeah, they're deceptive, duplicitous. The other thing with many of these projects and with the agencies that regulate them is they'll only give you as much information as they want unless you demand more. So demand more information, including what are these pump stations, where are they going? And hopefully if we get a full EIS, those would be the kinds of questions that you would need to ask. I want to know exactly which equipment is going in along the route, where it's going to be, and what the projected emissions are. Project scoping and permitting should always consider public health, and it's really exciting to see the town resolutions that have been passed specifically mention health in addition to safety. That's a huge start. Regulatory agencies, when they're permitting projects, I'm talking about wells and all equipment, do not consider health unless it's part of an environmental impact statement. Anyone here get comment on the New York Energy Plan when it came out? Great. So one of the major issues with the New York Energy Plan is it focuses on reducing climate change impacts at the same time that it focuses on expanding oil and gas and delivery infrastructure. So a little bit contradictory there. But the other thing that it does not do at all is it does not consider the air impacts of new distribution and processing systems. So whether it's compressed natural gas facilities for fueling vehicles, which the energy plan talks about, they don't make any effort to consider the emissions from that. So same thing of moving all this gas and oil in. Again, the cumulative effects of adding more pollution sources, especially in areas that are already intensely polluted, should be considered. It's not being considered. And another thing to make sure, if Pilgrim Pipeline Holdings LLC continues to expand its project, though I have a feeling these towns are going to make them turn tail, it's hopeful. But if they do continue to develop this project and expand their planning, every effort should be made to push them to have the most stringent emissions controls, frequent technology upgrades so that they're continually improving how they capture emissions, and continual emissions monitoring and reporting. And this is also where the Clean Air Act is a problem, because if you have to get a federal air permit, you actually are required, the state, New York manages those federal permits, requires you to do emissions monitoring and reporting, and you don't have to do that under a minor source permit. So, and with all of these companies, again, whether it's production or delivery or processing, a lot of the frontline communities are coming forward now and saying that it's the company, in this case Pilgrim Pipeline Holding, that needs to bear the burden of proof safety. And they have yet to demonstrate to the community where they're proposing this project, exactly what they're doing and how they're going to guarantee health and safety. And then I just want to underscore another thing that a lot of the frontline communities are saying, that, when you get an air permit, it says you're permitted to pollute, to emit 60,000 tons of carbon or 100,000 tons of nitrogen oxide, and you have your permits to pollute. But that doesn't mean that it's freedom from harm. And as long as people are having these health impacts, they have the right to demand that the companies do a better job. And I would hope that that's a really key message as you all go forward in working on the Pilgrim pipeline issue, to demand that your health be protected, and that they come clean about what they're actually trying to do when it comes to air quality and health. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Is an interactive online mapping program that we've developed as an organizing and education tool for everybody. It's open source, it's online for everybody to use, and we're hoping that you do use it and take it to your legislators and educate your legislators, talk to your community members, look at it online when you're up at 2 a.m. and you can't sleep, just to go through it and see what's actually going on in New York. This is what the map looks like when you open it up online. It's called You Are Here, nymap.org. So we spent the last 2 years creating our infrastructure map of fracking infrastructure across New York State, so we could get a clear picture of the intent of the industry, and so people could actually see what's happening and utilize this map to strategize and organize and connect to each other. There's a few audience members here that were instrumental in putting this map together. You want to raise your hands? You guys are awesome. We wanted to put a human face to all these little dots that are on the map. The dots range from operational pipelines to compressor stations, proposed pipelines. The Pilgrim pipeline is one of those proposed pipelines. Power plants, waste treatment and disposal, storage support, and other facilities. So we developed this campaign and made this big Google map pin called You Are Here. So we created this so people can remember it and realize that there's actually real people behind all these little dots and all these infrastructure problems that are popping up in our state. This is a group fighting the Constitution pipeline just west of here. This is the Millennium Pipeline. You can see the pathway of that pipeline is cutting right through the forest, right where people go fishing. These are some of the folks fighting the frack oil bomb trains that you probably know some of these folks here. So we wanted to give you an overview of how the industry is looking at our state. And we have the regions of active drilling in PA. So they're using New York State for their storage and their waste and their service hubs to market and to export, which we'll get into. So before this big fracking boom happened, I just want to show you what the flow of gas looked like before, where it was sort of coming in from Canada. It would move west and east, and then it would move north to south from points down south, and this was all aimed at domestic markets. We now see that the key word is now bidirectional. So the Pilgrim pipeline is a bidirectional pipeline. You'll start hearing that more as the industry starts realizing that they can have bigger options to deliver gas and change the flow of the direction of the gas to suit their opportunities for export. So now if we zero in on the Pilgrim pipeline here, excuse me 1 second. What you would see if you use this map is you will click on the little dot that the Pilgrim pipeline represents, and what pops up is a little map pin of information that's linked to documents, websites, and most importantly, this box links you to the local group that is actually working on the infrastructure project. So we actually have Riverkeeper, and we would love to connect your local group to this. We just launched it a few months ago. And we have Kate Millsaps from Sierra Club is also one of the contacts on here. And so we feel that this is the way to establish our network throughout the state. We don't believe this information should be centralized with one organization, but to be able to build a community groundswell so people can connect and share with each other and teach each other as they learn new tactics. I mean, you guys know what you need for your community. You know your community the best. So one tactic that we might use in New York City just won't work up here. So you need to be able to input that information on what you can do, and you can strategize. You know your town the best. So you can then, if you become successful with that, teach others, and we will all grow and be able to have this huge library of tactics and strategy together to work together. So we now have these detailed maps of the Pilgrim pipeline. I made a couple of copies of it. I put up on the table up there, and I also made a bunch of color copies of the You Are Here map and some little postcards that you can take home so you can remember. So we have, I just took a couple of there's 18 different maps of it. I took a couple just from this sort of local area. So we have, this is running from Greene into Ulster County, passing through Saugerties. You can notice that it's starting to pass through forest land and, farmland. So here it's passing through forest land. This is passing right through one of my favorite farms here called Whirly Gig Farm in Hurley, New York. Our friends Pete and Lisa run this place, and it's a spectacular historical farm. The soil's been fertilized from First Nations using the Three Sisters farming method. The Ashokan Creek runs through this property. It's so beautiful, and I just don't think that this is a place for an adjacent crude oil pipeline. Moving south, we're passing through lakes in our beloved Rosendale, through Tilson, New Paltz. You can see now the pipeline tees off here. I Google Earthed it, and Google Earth is an amazing tool, by the way. You can see these little dots and these little circles over here on the Google Earth thing. This says, one of them says Hess on top of it, so there's some kind of storage or refining going on there. You guys might know more details about what's going on there. But that, you'll notice right next to there, there's a residential neighborhood. People live there. It's a problem. Moving south, we're going through more densely populated areas in mountains and lakes. I do want to move back to talking about the fracking infrastructure. This is all interconnected because they would be using fracked gas to refine this crude oil. So this whole industry is very symbiotic with each other. They work together. And so we really need to start envisioning a new New York, how we want to envision our future here. So we see that the infrastructure is setting up in New York State, along with all the compressor stations. These are machines every so often along a pipeline, say if there's a hill or a curve, or if a pipeline meets another pipeline, they need to compress the gas so it pushes through the pipeline. So this is pointing here to the CPV power plant down in Orange County that they want to build. It's absolutely beautiful, pristine farmland in the historic Black Dirt region of New York. This is an area after September 11th. Many first responders moved to get out of the city to get some clean air because they were getting such bad respiratory illnesses. And they were facing a lot of breathing problems, so they moved up to this farmland, and now this is what's happening. This compressor station is getting built, and historically along compressor station, or along waterways is where they used to build power plants. Now they're using these compressor stations to now actually build new power plants, which are huge emissions polluters, right over the farmland, right over onto people's homes, right into our ecosystem. So if they're willing to do this to 9/11 first responders, they're willing to do this to anybody. This is exactly the farmland that they are proposing this power plant. And this is the local group there that's fighting it. They are the Neighbors United for the Facts. I just want to give you a little bit more insight on New York State and what's actually going on here, because we all have to realize that as much as we're here to learn about the Pilgrim Pipeline and fight the Pilgrim Pipeline, we have to realize that we are all interconnected into a larger network, and the more educated we are about that larger network, we'll be able to actually be more strategic and really understand the full development of this infrastructure that's happening to our state and to our world. So in the Finger Lakes region, if you remember from the map a little bit ago, they want to use this as more of like a storage and service hub for the industry. So there is a little bit of a nightmare going on there. There's a landfill there, and it's run by a private company called Dixon's. They accept waste that has been like biosolids from sewer sludge from the village of Bath. They're authorized to apply to nearby farms as fertilizer. The problem is the wastewater treatment that they are processing now contains leachate from fracking waste. They're taking fracking waste. So basically they're taking all of that waste from those biosolids, radioactive from the Marcellus Shale, and they're spreading it all over our farmland for fertilizer. Gotta take a drink of water after that one. So they're really, being very strategic in how they're planning, all of this infrastructure build out. They really see our, all of the center at Horseheads, the rail storage, storing the silica that is like a fine dust that helps the drilling take place in Pennsylvania. So the empty Seneca salt caverns have been mined for over 100 years now for salt. And we have sort of a sick joke at St. Energy Project saying only Dr. Evil from Marvel comic books could actually develop the plan that they're actually going forward with. And that's taking those empty salt caverns and storing liquefied petroleum gas inside those empty salt caverns, which is right in our wine region, right where our farmland is. I can only see like nothing but devastation coming from that. So you can see the Center for Horseheads. You can see this is a local group that's working to fight that storage hub and basically a service hub for the industry. So there's a baseball field, and then right behind that is what the Horseheads facility is. So they're doing this right on the kids' playground. I want to talk a little bit about the metro area here. We have some maps of the Algonquin Interconnect Market Pipeline that's going through Westchester County. We just have these maps of the high consequence area and the potential impact radius if there is an explosion, and you saw those really nerve-wracking, explosive images from Philip. There's not only the high consequence area, there's the potential impact radius. You'll notice this industry, where the AIM pipeline is being built is right next to Indian Point Nuclear Facility. So if there's an explosion there, it's pretty much game over for all of us, right? So I want to talk briefly about a project that we're fighting in New York City right now, and this ties back into the community here. We see that bidirectional pipelines and gas moving from the Marcellus Shale, that your pipeline is slated specifically for export to sell to the highest international bidder. So you can see down at the bottom of this slide, there's something called Port Ambrose LNG. This is a proposed liquefied natural gas marine terminal off the coast of our beach there. So because it's not profitable really for them to be selling gas to the American market anymore, because everybody's willing to pay, 6 to 10 times more overseas. Why do they want to, have us as customers? They don't. They want to ship it overseas, liquefy it, and ship it out to the highest international bidder. So I just wanted to let you know that these LNG ports this is like the size of the Empire State Building. And this is about 10 stories high. So this is a really, really big deal that would be right off the coast where we go swimming at the beach. The one problem with that, and this is how it all ties back into all of us here in this state, is this LNG port is being proposed in the exact same piece of real estate out in the ocean, which you can only build on a certain portion of this real estate, because over in the dark blue area, there's like this really deep trench, and then these sort of lavender lengthened trapezoids are where our shipping lanes are. This green area here is a proposed offshore wind farm, which has been in the works for a while, and now that the Liberty Natural Gas has come in and said, oh, I want to build, an LNG port there. So we have this real dichotomy now. Do we want a future of renewable energy, or do we want to stay on the same path that we've been going? So we have choice number 2. So there are many countries who are already producing a lot of their energy from renewable sources. It's possible. There's a Stanford University study. I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of Professor Mark Jacobson and his team. I have some postcards also up there of the Solutions Project for New York State, and they've done all 50 states, but as you can tell, right off the coast of New York, where the real red area is, it's a really high level area to produce offshore wind power. Support already for offshore wind is very strong in New York. And in order for us as a state to go renewable, we need 40% of our energy coming from offshore wind. So if this LNG port gets built, we won't have the possibility really of going renewable in our state. As everybody else has been talking about all the other impacts, the medical impacts. These are also like cumulative costs that the fossil fuel industry is creating. So just remember, the way that the industry is seeing New York, stores, service hubs, waste, shipping out to the highest international bidder, that this is the way that we see New York, okay? We can see solar and biodiesel manufacturing, tourism, wine regions. I mean, if you guys know anything about the Finger Lakes wine, it's amazing. We can really, really actually build this, and all of this is really possible. So seeing so many people interested in actually fighting this Pilgrim pipeline, just know that you're part of a bigger equation when we actually shut this pipeline down, because it's absolutely completely possible. So I'm just going to leave you with that. Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, this is the time for questions and answers. I hope you made notes of some questions. At this point, I just want to say we will not entertain speech making or even announcements. This is really for questions and answers about the Pilgrim pipeline. I think I know some of of you out there, and I will have to stop you if you breach that guideline. And you know that I can. I have. So I see a hand, and please speak very loudly so the panel can hear your question, and then whoever wants to respond to your question,
Oh, sure.
to please come up to the mic.
I was just wondering what the structure of the proposed pipeline, is it cast iron? What is it made, what would it be made, what's the material that it would be made of? How far apart are the seams from one place to the next? And are the seams more hazardous than the surface, the overall surface? Because sometimes in welding, the welds are stronger.
Hold on one second, because I see people are leaving, and I want to just make an important announcement, and then we'll get to that question. I meant to do that right away. I want to be sure that you all have copies of the municipal resolution. And if you don't, there are copies at the exits. If we're going to stop this pipeline, we're going to need all of your help. You're going to need to go to your town, city, or village. And if you don't feel confident in responsibly answering all the questions, call some of us and we will get you help. If you do feel confident, you know, we're all very busy people. We would like you to be the representative and take the lead in your town, city, or village to prevent this pipeline from being built. And I think if it's very early in the process, I think if we're proactive, we may have a much better chance. Okay, now the question about the structure of the pipeline itself.
Yeah, I'm wondering about what the causality of most of the spills. Is it flaws, or is it environmental earthquakes, things like that? Freezes and things like that?
80% of the pipeline incidents are caused by equipment failure, human failure. A small, percentage of them are earthquakes and natural causes. In terms of what the pipeline, the design of the pipeline, there is no information on that. I'm really kind of mad at myself because I didn't grab my Pilgrim folder when I ran out the door. They may have said what the material is for the pipeline, but I can say generally that there are no details about its construction.
So you wouldn't even know how far apart the pump station is?
No. I don't. We don't even know how far apart the two pipelines are. All we know is that there are two. Oh, and I just to follow up on what Anna said, it's early in the process in that there has not a formal permitting process has not started. However, it's our understanding that this process, that the company plans on starting the permitting process in December. So it's in fact right around the corner, and it is incredibly important. So I've been saying, permitting processes have a momentum of their own. So once it gets going, the chances of bringing things to a halt, really decrease. So the time is now to get resolutions of oppositions from community, from towns, to all the federal and state elected officials, to the New York Thruway Authority, to the New York Department of Transportation, which would have to grant an exception to its accommodation plan to allow for a right-of-way to be used, to the DEC.
Get it on the radio.
Yes, exactly, it should be on the radio.
Also, once the permitting process starts, the first phase of that is what's called scoping. And that's where you've got to get all of these questions out on the table. Because if it doesn't make it into the scope, it's very hard to deal with it later. But I want to give you a hopeful example. It took Rockland County 5 years of organizing to prevent a Public Service Commission announced that it would not allow that project to move forward. So I say that because I think that that's a beacon of hope. We lost the Fortis case, we lost, for those of you who are familiar with it, the new capacity zone, although that is still being challenged. But we now have a victory that our own State Public Service Commission is responsible for preventing a very damaging facility. So I hope that will give you all hope. And I saw a question in the back, please.
Speak up. Yeah, my question is about the off-gassing. That seems like the absolute most dangerous part. Is there a way to find out where they would be having the off-gassing facilities, and what do we do if Pilgrim comes knocking on our door?
Sure, are you asking about the different facilities along the way?
Yes.
Or, yeah, and again, that goes to just with what was said just now about the scoping. There are so many details about this project, including the type of facilities that they would have all along the pipeline and what would happen there and how often they would be releasing pressure and so on, that are only going to come up during the permitting and scoping process. And so, as Manager just said, everybody needs to stay involved to ask exactly that question. So I don't think any of us have the answer to that. And that was, as I said earlier, I searched high and low just for basic information, like where the pump stations are going to be. And it doesn't exist right now. As far as what to do if somebody comes knocking at your door, because maybe you're more directly involved in this, can speak to it.
I would just say no.
And get in touch and spread that
Yeah,
information.
just to say no is exactly the right answer. You can't stress this enough. This is not a government agency or an elected official or government entity that has the power of eminent domain, that has the power to get on your property or to eventually take your property for some larger public use. It's a private company. You do not have to give them access to your property. You don't have to, they'll give you, the letters, the draft forms that we've seen are written in very suggestive languages that makes it sound like you're doing them a courtesy by allowing them, by signing, giving them permission to get on your land. But you have power over your own property. They don't have a right to come on your land, to do the surveys, or to create an easement to put their pipeline through your land. You have the power to prevent that, so.
I saw your hand.
They have come knocking at our door.
Please speak up.
They have come knocking at our door. And they did more or less, they bully, that's their attitude, they bully you. And did say that they could seek an eminent domain proceeding if we don't sign a letter authorizing them to come on our property. And because we got nervous with the eminent domain proceeding threat, we signed a letter and we filled in, or you can't come on without notice, and we want to have somebody on the property. Is there any way that we could rescind that letter?
Yes.
What do we send them a letter, certified mail return receipt? What?
Form that you can get online from the CR.
I have a form for rescinding.
But
and
someone's
denying,
speaking
another
over
to
here.
deny.
Would appreciate that very much, thank you.
Where are you gonna post it?
We can, do you have a link to that form?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
It might be, there's a new, there's a, it's CAP, but it's the acronym, but it's a New Jersey, New York Alliance Against the Pilgrim Pipeline, and they have a lot of documents for the landowners on their website. And I'm sure they have those documents. I would just Google, does anyone remember what CAP, it's C-A-P, if you Googled.
Jed, it's on the handout with the link that's Stop Pilgrim Pipeline.
Coalition to Stop.
Maps.
Okay, so it's on the handout that we have outside that includes the resolutions. So just go to that website and you can download that form.
But that is a New Jersey form, and so people should be cautioned
that it may or may not be an appropriate form to use in New York.
They have
So-
changed some of their forms to go to New York State.
This is the handout.
I would, I don't have an answer to that question for New York, but I would advise, Sally, wait 1 second, let me just say that. I would advise you to call the New York Department of State and ask them how you can do that, and they'll tell you. That's who you want to call.
And we will get these answers and post them on the Citizens for Local Power website. And then we'll also, the PowerPoint presentations will also be posted. And if you want to educate yourself so that you can be a spokesperson to oppose this pipeline, be sure and get a copy of the issues paper before you leave if you don't have it already. Yes, please.
Do you have an idea of how much they're offering financially for signing an easement?
The question was how much they're offering for an easement for the property, and they haven't gotten to that stage yet. So we don't have any information on what they're providing.
Judith?
For those communities that are not directly in the path of the pipeline, but who want to support those in the pipeline path that are resisting it, would you recommend that we alter the resolution, present resolutions to our own town boards, and perhaps include language that even though we're not in the pathway, we would still have adverse effects if this pipeline goes forward in terms of health and degradation of the entire region? And would you recommend that we go forward and alter the resolution to fit our situation and present it to our town boards?
Absolutely, and you don't even have to alter it because we anticipated that question. And we have, in the handout that we have, there are actually 2 model resolutions. One is a resolution for communities that are proposed to be traversed by the pipeline, and the other is for other communities that do not want to see it in neighboring communities or New York State.
So I'm hoping that this gentleman who's recording this, that we can get copies of tonight's event to all the public access stations in the Hudson Valley, because there was a lot of information that a lot of people really need to get. So we can get copies to all the stations.
And
It'll be on
Michael
YouTube.
uploads this as YouTube.
Mhm. It'll be on YouTube, and it'll hopefully be posted to their website.
From the Citizen for Local Power website.
Philip, you implied that the pipeline does not have a right-of-way from the throughway yet. Is that clear? They do not have that right-of-way? All this work is being done without?
Yes, so the question, just to make sure everyone heard it, the question was that asking about my statement during my presentation that I did not believe the company had permission from the Thruway Authority to use the Thruway as a right-of-way. And yes, the answer is, yeah, I don't. Everything I've heard suggests that they don't have that permission from the Thruway, and they're unlikely to get it, because I know from other power projects, electrical transmission projects that have been proposed over the years, when they looked at using the Thruway as the right-of-way, the state, if they even allow it, they charge a tremendous amount of money, basically a fee to be able to use it. I think Jen mentioned there's a detail where I think if you're, I don't know the details of it, maybe she can come up and describe it, but they have to actually allow a different kind of use for something like an oil pipeline. So they haven't done that. My understanding through contacts I have in the state is that they went to meet with the Thruway Authority officials, and they came away from that meeting thinking that's not really a viable option. Again, this is secondhand. That doesn't mean it's the company has given up on it. I don't think we know that, but I think it's not an easy task for them to get that kind of permission. That's what I'm going to make sure people understand.
Yeah, sure. I do think it's it's harder to get a change of policy than it is to just get approval, the permit through a standard permitting process. I did actually speak with the person in charge of governmental relations at the Thruway Authority today, and they, there had been that initial conversation with the company, but no formal process has yet begun. There hasn't, nothing has been submitted to trigger a formal process. If that does happen, he didn't say, that it will happen, but if it did happen, it would be an open and transparent process, he assured me, that would involve everyone. I did send him our resolution and background paper and assurances that many other towns would be opposing this, so they might as well just say no.
Susan?
There's a real great concern from the perspective of, and I don't know if you called town hall when you got New Paltz Town Hall when they approached you. We had somebody also call New Paltz Town Hall who had gotten approached by the pipeline people, and they were so concerned because nobody on their neighbors, had gotten called. We said it's probably because they have to go off the right of way or whatever. But the way they approached you and the way they lied to you really is a concern to me, because everyday people who are going to get approached like you are going to find themselves in the same situation. So I think we have to take a more aggressive stance, and since the press is here, and I know she writes for the New Paltz Times and all the other papers, I am going to tell our New Paltz police that, that we will tell the people in New Paltz, if you get approached and if you get harassed, please call the police, and we will let the police know that if somebody calls them, that they need to respond. So I think we have to take a really aggressive stance. I mean, we saw that with the fracking when they were going around, getting people to sign the fracking and things, and then they found out they signed their land away, or they couldn't get a mortgage, or all the things that we've learned over all our years working on fracking. So we have to be really, really proactive that this kind of stuff doesn't happen, and somebody sitting here doesn't now have to take it upon herself to figure out how she gets herself out of something because she was harassed and lied to. So I think we, as government officials,
Exactly. I think that every town, city, and village should ask their assessor to notify people along the line that they have a right to refuse.
I doubt that company will, so one of the things, a representative was supposed to come to our Rosendale meeting, but then didn't show up. But one of my first questions was, I want to see a list of residents that they've contacted, because I want to be able to contact them and tell them that they don't have a right. So, the company does not have a right to come on their property. I'm going to try to call and get that information, and Susan, I can give you the contact information, number for the company. They're not likely to give it, but I do think what we could do also is post on the town website information about this, and also post a link to any documents we can find that will allow people to rescind permission that they've already provided.
maybe we can make up something that then all the towns that are in the, in the pathway, that we can post it. Yeah,
Right.
so yes, we can post it on all of our websites, and we can do a joint sort of release and maybe get it out to, different.
That's a great idea. Thank you.
There's on Facebook, if you guys look up the Citizens Against the Pilgrim Pipeline, they're having a landowners Know Your Rights training workshop on December 8th. It's in Chatham, New Jersey, but I wonder if somehow you guys could connect with them and maybe have New York, New Jersey, make this happen. Maybe you have like two Know Your Rights trainings. That might be a possibility.
Skype that one.
Or everybody just go down to New Jersey, get to know the people in New Jersey. You guys are all connected by this pipeline.
Okay, please, Phil.
Very quickly, just on Susan's comment, I mean, if you want to take aggressive action, another thing to do would be great if you or other public officials write a letter to the attorney, get some copies of these letters and the names of the companies that the people that are going out and harassing people, and call the attorney, write a letter to the Attorney General's office and say this company is fraudulently approaching private landowners, that you'll get a reaction from Schneider.
I'm sure Eric will be more than happy to respond.
Yeah.
I see those two hands, but I saw this hand first.
Yeah, I'm in Newburgh, and we're concerned particularly about the lateral that's coming off of the pipeline that's going directly to the Quasaya Creek and into the Hudson, which is connecting up with Global and a project that is off the table right now, but we'll be back on again. It has to do about refining tar sand. And what my specific question, though, is it's very kind of vague as to where that lateral is, and I'm wondering if you could just, who do you call to find out? How do you find out that kind of information so that we can begin to then map, you know, where that pipe lateral is going and where it's not going?
I mean, if you want it, I can give you I brought 5 18-page handouts. I can give you a copy of it. I brought them to give away today. So if you want to go back, I'll open up my PowerPoint here. I have that part of where it goes right into Newburgh. This lateral, right? And here it sort of like hooks down. And this sort of...
No, that's Rosetown.
That's Rosetown. Okay, then I'm mistaken. I'm sorry. This little hook here you're talking about, this might be a little bit further. This one is going. So I have these detailed maps that were actually just released this month. So you're welcome to take it. I have a couple copies back here. I'll bring them up to you.
And I need to speak with the Supervisors Association in the morning, so please save me when I can. Okay. Go ahead.
Well, the last questioner touched on it. Well, first of all, there's something I need to clear up here factually. It's an ambiguity. There was a talk about 434,000 train car loads in 2013. Is that a national or a New York State figure? But that's not my main question, sorry.
I'm guessing that it's national,
Yeah,
but it's footnoted in that background paper, so you can look.
Well, it's not on the multi-page handout. I looked through it to find.
No footnote.
Is that from the presentation?
It comes from the CRS, the Congressional Research Service Board.
National, okay. But my question is, the previous speaker touched on it. There was going to be this project involving tar sands crude in New Windsor, and very recently we heard that they were calling it off. Did the opposition that I think Philip, your group, and all were starting to mount, did that play a role, and is there anything we can learn here?
So I think I've already heard the question. I'd like to think so. I'd like to think Riverkeeper single-handedly stopped that, but no, I think the amount. Well, there's another. So the New Windsor project near Newburgh. This is the company where they have the oil storage terminal, and
It was a heating plant for heating the tar.
Global Energy.
Global.
right. Yes. So Global was proposing to turn this oil storage facility and build a rail yard and create a whole transfer terminal in New Windsor. So they would accept oil by train and then they would put it on the barges. So that, yeah, they withdrew those applications. That doesn't mean that they could reapply for to do that same expansion of that project in the future. I think part of the reason they withdrew is because Global's other facility in Albany is facing a lot of opposition. We filed a lawsuit against that facility. There's a lot of local public opposition. So the short answer is I think that they're sensing that if they go forward in New Windsor, there's a lot of local concern there that they're going to get the same response. So I think they're just kind of pulling back for now. They may be waiting to see if this pipeline project goes forward because that may help them ship more oil if they can link into that. I'm not sure, but I think the public opposition and the outcry played a role in it, certainly.
I also want to let you know that Orange County has given the company permission on their own public right-of-ways, but the rationale is that they have to give permission on public right-of-ways. That does not mean you have to give permission on private property, and I know that Rosendale will not give permission on our right-of-ways. Let's see. Question in the back, but please speak up.
Sure. Can the municipalities that the proposed pipeline is going to run through regulate the pipeline and the associated facilities through local zoning, as has been done with the gas fracking?
So this came up in Rosendale because our fracking ban, our law, that we adopted not too long ago, actually prohibits not just the extraction, but the transport of gas and petroleum products through the town. And our town attorney thinks that, that holds some weight. There are laws, interstate commerce laws, for instance, are very powerful, and this does involve 2 states, New Jersey and New York. So I think that legally it's complicated. I don't have an answer to that question. We're hoping that our local ban, sends at the very least, a political message, but legally we're not entirely certain how much they will have. They might have some insight.
So that's a great question. I think it's complicated. Generally, if it's an interstate project like this, it does come into what they call interstate commerce clause or a constitutional law question of a state or a municipality can't put additional kind of restrictions on an industry that's moving a product across state lines that will burden that industry, basically. That's the terminology they use. But if you can make a compelling argument that there's a very grave public safety concern or some kind of very compelling local concern, that means that industry in that local neighborhood or that community is too dangerous, it's too polluting. I think you have a chance if you can get past that. It's difficult, but you can get past that commerce clause. I mean, I think it's a good thing for towns to push forward with, like they did with the fracking, to see how far that goes and to see if the company challenges it. But I think that the key at this early stage is really for landowners to refuse access or to refuse rights of way as much as possible. That'll make it very difficult for them to get the route through. So.
Yeah, this is such an important issue, so I'm going to add something as well. This is actually being tested now with compressor stations. So, you have a pipeline, which is interstate for all the reasons Phil just mentioned and Jen mentioned, it's difficult. But wherever the pump stations go in, depending on what the specs are for them and how big they'd be, if they're considered industrial equipment and you're zoned and it's going to go in a residential area, there's potentially an argument there. This, of course, assumes that municipalities have zoning laws that prohibit industrial activities in residential areas, which they don't all do. So, but it's an area that's really being tested and it needs to be tested. So.
I also want to add that even though there is not Marcellus shale in this immediate area, there have been a lot of fracking bans passed by towns and counties along this pipeline. So the work that the anti-fracturists have done has really laid some important groundwork where, 5 years ago, many of these elected officials really were unfamiliar with the danger of fracking. Now, there's almost unanimous opposition to fracking in New York. And a lot of these public officials have gone on record and are part of a statewide alliance of elected officials protecting, I think it's called elected officials for protecting New York State. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions, and then, the panelists will be here for a few minutes. Way in the back, but you're gonna have to holler!
Is it cheaper to ship stuff by barge than a pipeline for the short term?
Cheaper by barge.
Short term.
We gotta build the pipeline. That's pretty exciting. What to do?
The question is it cheaper to ship by barge? And I think it's, as Kim started chatting, you can't really look at it that way, I don't know if you mean, because it, you know, cheaper how? Per unit of energy? I mean, certainly the question right now for all of these companies with both gas and oil is that they need to get the stuff to market. It's sitting there. And so a pipeline is a very long-term, very expensive capital investment. So
what the cost projection would be by throwing double barges out there versus building that pipeline?
It would destroy the Hudson River, so we want to consider that cost.
well, but are you talking, I mean, it's just cheaper for the company. Certainly, getting it to market as quickly as possible with barges would be cheaper for the company.
If they could have double the barges and stop the pipeline, I'd rather have barges. Well, I would call everybody, if the industry is calling everybody along that pipeline, I suggest we do a given market completion too. And I think alternatives are really important, like rocket stoves and heating oil and compost, thermal mass rocket heaters, even though man, I might think of them.
Well, I would say that the pipeline, the reason why rail has been the preferred alternative, the pipeline network hasn't been built out, is, well, one of the reasons I mentioned earlier is because of the flexibility you have with other forms of transport in responding to market conditions, because, you know, it could be one price on the East Coast and another price on the Gulf Coast, you know, 1 month, and then that can change in a month, and they can, you know, just send a train elsewhere. But, and the cost of building a pipeline, I mean, that's an expensive investment and a huge risk. And so it hasn't been taken. Now demand is such that, you know, they're thinking the risk is not so great. And this is both foreign and domestic demand. And other markets in the country for crude oil are becoming saturated. This is like the East Coast is, you know, that's the market that they're looking at now. But, you know, what you do, like doubling the barge capacity or doubling rail or whatever, as I said, this is adding capacity. Do we need that capacity? You have to talk about, you know, who. It's not, this isn't helping us, our communities. You know, this is, and you know, a lot of this is being exported. This is, you know, this is profits for the companies. You know, that's what this is. And so, you know, what we want to do in New York State is discourage this kind of long-term investment in fossil fuel infrastructure. And we have all of these laudable goals to reduce, you know, fossil fuel use, to reduce emissions already on the books in the state. And we now have to, like, meet those goals. So we need the policies in place to reduce that fossil fuel dependence.
You make hydrogen.
And there is a process in New York State reforming the energy vision. And it's focused on electricity, but it's focused on transitioning to energy efficiency, distributed generation of renewables, microgrids, and storage. And in New York State, we're actively figuring out how to do that right now. And I never stand in front of a microphone anymore without giving a 5 kilowatt solar challenge. And that is, I'm going to ask if people in this room will commit to installing or causing to be installed an additional 5 kilowatts. 5 kilowatts of solar in the next calendar year. So how many people will take that challenge by show of hands? Come on, you can do better than that. I want to see every hand in this room up, please. Thank you. I saw 2 more very persistent hands. Please go ahead.
Okay. I was wondering, Ulster County legislation, are you guys going to be talking about this? I'm sorry, at the county level, is it going to be
You know, I have to be a little careful with the Ulster County legislature because I want to be able to vote on this question should it come before the legislature, and I don't want to have to recuse myself. So I'm going to ask all of you actually, we have plans to bring this to the Ulster County Legislature. Tomorrow morning, I am speaking with the Supervisors Association. We already have Rosendale. I expect New Paltz is on its way, and you all will take it back to your towns, and we'll get that momentum going the way we did with Fortis and with the new capacity zone. And the other thing, do you still have a question?
Just a quickie, probably to, I'm sorry, Mr. Riverkeeper. Any idea why the proposed pipeline crosses the Hudson from west to east and back to west within a few miles of Albany, south of Albany?
I think that's what I'm getting.
Would you restate the question?
Sure. The lady asked if any idea why. I think when you look at the map that Pilgrim has on their website, it looks like there's a branch of the pipeline just south of Albany that goes across the Hudson, actually over to what looks like Troy or Rensselaer to Lower. It's a silly, what I call a cartoon map. It's not very helpful, but I don't know why. I mean, I can tell you, we're not going to let a pipeline across the Hudson. Not an oil pipeline, there's no way. So,
There and back.
right, it's two-directional, right? So, I don't know. I think we have to wait and get more details on that. But I would guess there's already an oil storage terminal they want to link into, or there's some kind of transfer facility over there, and we're looking into that they could then load and ship from.
Okay, I think we started about 15 minutes late. We're going to end on time. That doesn't mean that those last few hands don't have important questions. Please come up and get your question answered, and we'll make sure that this is recorded and available on the Citizens for Local Power website. Thank you all for being here.
Before you leave, if any of you have been directly contacted by the pipeline company, excuse me, just for 1 second. If any of you have been contacted directly by the company and would not mind doing so, could you come up and let me have your contact information so that I can let you know the information that's coming my way. Thanks.
Also, if you have been approached or someone does come onto your property, please get their license. Thank you.